scissors contest, but now we have to see which rock is more papery, for lack of a better term.
Sure, and this Gruul Adventures deck, we've seen Gruul aggro being attempted at various points in the standard format. One thing that's always held it back is a lack of a good second one-drop. You have your Pelt Collector stars, and even that is a little hard to cast sometimes, given the deck's mana base. But then you really want to have backup one-drops for some redundancy there, and Edgewall Innkeeper, as we've seen in various shells, Team of Clover, Golgari Adventures, that card, if it goes uncontested, that might be the best one-drop we've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, and just having all of these cards come together is really just a sign of the metagame shifting a lot. You couldn't play these Edgewall Innkeepers while people were playing a bunch of Mayhem Devils, for example. Now that people have moved away from that flavor of aggression to combat these Reclamation decks, the format has opened up a little bit more to these 1-toughness creatures.
Yeah, and we have a fast start for Ueda on Knight of the Ebon Legion into Black Lance Paragon here, facing off against a more conventional Gruul aggro start with Pelt Collector into Paradise Druid for Andrew.
And it looks like Ueda is considering taking this trade here, but decides that in this sort of game, you really need to be the one laying out the early beats, just because your cards don't scale to the late game quite as well as Macarico's do.
Now, one interesting twist here is had Ueda traded off with the Pelt Collector, then Hunted Nightmare could come down and, as far as I can tell, not have to put a count on anything because Paradise Road still has Hexproof.
Ooh, that's cute. I believe Nightmare targets the opponent, but I might be wrong on that one.
Oh, no, you are correct. So a nice way to dodge around that and still get a good blocker when the time comes, which maybe is an argument for making that trade so that it's hard to get in front of the 4/5 menace there from the Amber, from the Nightmare. But we do have a good follow-up on turn 3 regardless in Spawn of Mayhem off the top for Ueda. An aerial threat that's hard for the Gruul deck to deal with.
And this is one of the big draws to making this play and not trading off there, is it allows Ueda to actually pave the way for what they know the best possible turn 3 is. That's just this 4/4 flying trample that deals a bunch of extra damage on its own up front.
And another Knight of the Ebon Legion off the top for Ueda, attacking with the first one, as well as the Spawn of Mayhem.
Ooh, big trade coming up.
And Ueda tries to pump the Knight of the Ebon Legion. Andrew has the Storm to take that down and eat Ueda's entire turn. He would have loved to have followed it up with a Hunted Nightmare, with another Knight of the Ebon Legion. But now Andrew has a chance to seize initiative again, playing that Bonecrusher Giant as a 4/3, pumping up the Pelt Collector, attacking him for 3.
This is a big swing because Spawn of Mayhem dealing damage to both players sounds good at first, but it can become a huge liability. Look at those Embercleaves hanging out in Andrew's hand.
Yeah, if that Embercleave is on a Bonecrusher Giant, that's 10 damage right there. So that's 13. That Spawn of Mayhem, that 1 point there, maybe all the difference if Ueda decides not to block this turn.
What do you think the odds are that that Hunted Nightmare hasn't come down because of how scary the Death Touch Trample interaction is with an Embercleave?
Oh, that's an excellent point, Emma. It's, so you have to assign the lethal damage before trample. If you have Death Touch, that's just 1 point, and the rest carries on over. So in conjunction with Embercleave, that is a terrifying amount of damage. You don't want to set that up if you can at all help it. And Ueda does have Kai'Sa Freebooter to take an Embercleave. He sees the bad news that there are 2 copies there, so that one is guaranteed to come down this turn.
So there is the other bright side of this, where that being a second copy of Embercleave means you can feel safe to just throw this Kitesail Freebooter away, either to a chump block or to an Edict trade via Rankle, Master of Pranks.
And Ueda in a very tough situation here. I suppose it's not so tough knowing that he has to block, but finding a way back into this game is going to be difficult for sure.
Yeah, at this point, blocking, not optional, but it's a matter of figuring out how you can block and still have a game. It feels like this is so close. If you can keep that Knight of the Ebon Legion, you gotta want to do it so badly.
And Embercleave is a big difference between these two styles of deck, where Ueda's creatures, pound for pound, can match what the Gruul deck is doing, but he doesn't have a card like Embercleave that can really steal games by itself or push him across the finish line in quite the same way.
Right, it just gives so much reach to Andrew's School Adventures deck, whereas Ueda more or less has to plan to untap with any of these creatures or any of their damage sources to really get that pressure across.
Even get to follow up with the Edgewall Innkeeper here, and Spawn of Mayhem making life even more difficult for Ueda. You cannot afford to be dinging yourself for a point of damage here.
But that was a land off the top. That's Rankle. That's lethal.
That's it. Yeah, wow. So I guess no Emerald Leaves required for Ueda to get back into this game, and he manages to turn the race around with a timely top deck of that fourth land for Rankle, and Ueda is going to steal that first game against Andrew Macarico on Grawl Adventures. And you have to think, both players have a lot of removal to sideboard in. I imagine this matchup gets a little better for Ueda just because of the quantity of cards like Noxious Grasp and Grasp of Darkness.
Yeah, so one of the things that Ueda's got going for them on their side of the table is that all of these removal spells work on their own. Whereas if you look over at Andrew's deck, a lot of these removal spells that he has access to are things like Domri's Ambush, cards that rely on having other resources available for them to go off. And that can be a real liability whenever you're playing against someone with 3 Grasp of Darkness, 3 Noxious Grasp, a couple copies of Murderous Rider, the full grip of Heartless Act. There's a lot to really slog through if you plan for your Domri's Ambushes to have value.
I wonder if Ueda is going to de-emphasize some of these cheaper but weaker attackers that don't line up well against the sizing of Grawl's creatures, and also are quite weak in the face of Bonecrusher Giant.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're going to see over on Ueda's side is just really trying to grind out a lot of those sorts of advantages. If you can just check, say, the Edgewall Innkeepers of the world, that Elder Gargaroth we see hiding out in Andrew's 5-drop slot, then generally speaking, your cards can come out on top as long as you just pick apart the couple that are stronger, right? It's simply a matter of reaching that game state and getting to actually cast all of your spells.
If the game is becoming more grindy, and now Andrew is on the draw here, or for game 3 hypothetically, how do you feel about Embercleave? Is that a card that shifts dramatically in its effectiveness based on your posture in the matchup?
I think it is significantly stronger on the play, largely because just look at Andrew's hand. There are a couple of 1-drops. There's a Paradise Druid. It's easy to get out ahead of all of those removal spells, and then Embercleave makes it so every single creature you have is a real threat by itself.
And looking at Andrew's hand here, we see both halves of this Grawl Adventures deck, where you have turn 2 Paradise Druid into turn 3 Questing Beast, a very just solid, straightforward start by itself. But you also have these 2 Edgewall Innkeepers, currently with no adventure creatures to go off with those. But even destroying something as simple as a Lovestruck Beast, Andrew might be off to the races.
And look, this Kitesail Freebooter is so anemic here on Ueda's side. Like, sure, it blocks Edgewall Innkeeper and Paradise Druid, but no one is happily registering Stormcrows in their deck, right?
No, very happy to register Questing Beast, though. That one's going to attack him for 5. Although Noxious Grasp off the top there for Ueda, a nice answer lined up to that one.
And this is one where Ueda basically has to say, do I think that there is a copy of Embercleave in my opponent's hand right now? And if not, they may just go for Hunted Nightmare to try and be mana efficient. There are all these 3s in hand.
Right, but with Hunted Nightmare as the only big creature on their side of the board, it's tough because they get a choice, as we saw, of where to put that counter. And then the Questing Beast and whatever else and Andrew wants to put out can freely attack in there. But we see where this Grawl deck can be a little bit disjointed here. 2 copies of Pelt Collector, which are going to be 1/1 for the time being, and an Edgewall Innkeeper that, like the first one, does not have any adventure creatures to go along with it.
Now, let me just ask you something, though. How great does this hand look if Andrew just finds a Lovestruck Beast off the top?
Yeah, any adventure creature, any Embercleave, even that Castle Embereth on the board, if you're flooding the board with 1/1, so this is playing almost more like a White Weenie deck.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels like there are so many different angles that this Grawl Adventures deck can play on that I really like its position in the metagame at this point.
And there is Hunted Nightmare finally coming down, hoping to contain that board full of 1/1s and 2/2s.
How do you feel about trading a 3-drop for a 1-drop?
Don't feel great about it, gotta say.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's understandable. Most people would feel bad about it.
And just to land that for Andrew. So many cards here that allow him to regain the initiative, but unfortunately for him, does not find one just yet.
there's a point where this Gruul Adventurous deck, unlike a more stompy, traditional flavor of Gruul that we're used to, is more of a synergy deck. So you will have these sorts of disjointed, all enablers, no payoffs draws. That's the risk you run with leaning into higher synergies like that.
I remember just shortly after the release of Throne of Eldraine, we saw this similar shell with Once Upon a Time, which could really tie the room together in terms of stabilizing your mana base, and then if you were trying to pursue the adventure half of the deck, it could set that up. If you just wanted to enable an aggressive start, it could do that too. And without a card like that providing that kind of consistency, you do end up in situations like this more often.
And look at this. We just saw this Hunted Nightmare being sent into the red zone by Ueda, and then getting a clean 2-for-1 against Andrew. That's got to be a win. That is the whittling down of resources that Ueda wants to be encouraging.
And just another favorable passage there for Andrew. Now Ueda feels the freedom to start attacking.
And these are what the games that you win look like, right?
Second Hunted Nightmare, followed up by a second Kai'Sa Freebooter. And at this point, I don't think there's a case for holding that freebooter because Andrew's empty-handed. If he draws a removal spell or anything like that, he's going to play it. So there's really no chance to snag a card with Kai'Sa Freebooter. Just get the 1-2 on the board and hope that it helps.
And look at it this way. Even if it were something like a Naked Embercleave, Andrew could still just slam it for full retail here.
Now, Scavenging Ooze is a good draw. It's not an adventure creature. It's not one of your 4-drops or 5-drops. But that's one of the best 2-drops in the format and in Magic as a whole right now. And I think we're about to see why in this game.
Yeah, this Scavenging Ooze is really threatening to run away with things. Ueda needs to find an answer to this fast.
There's another big attack from Ueda, along with a 3-point from the Kai'Sa Freebooter. We'll see if Andrew...
This is one of the last points that these Nightmares can actually attack, largely because that Scavenging Ooze is going to be bigger than they are next turn. So it'll just be trading down over and over and over, and that is not where you want to be with those cards.
And this is still a little awkward for Andrew, because even if there was enough food for Scavenging Ooze, there are only 3 green sources in play at the moment, so playing the Ooze takes one of those out of the picture. You can only get it to a 4-4 this turn, which doesn't let you line up good blocks on these Nightmares.
Right, at this point you're almost looking at something like putting your 2 Death Touch creatures in front of one of them, and that can't feel good.
Going to see a double block with the 2 smaller creatures instead. Gives even more fuel for the Scavenging Ooze.
And I'm a little worried about this block in particular, largely because now we see Andrew in a spot where they just have to rip more creatures off the top to even be able to block. Whereas if we saw this Ooze become a 4-4 and also block with, say, the Edgewall Innkeeper, that puts Ueda in a position where they're forced to only kill 1 creature with their Hunted Nightmare.
How do you feel about Domri's Ambush?
Ooh, that's a nice one here. Being able to just take that Spawn of Mayhem out of the sky.
Does leave us still unable to block the 4/5 Menace there. But we do what we have to do.
Right, this is a spot where the Ooze is almost large enough to be able to just come back the other direction, right? It's basically, do you want to have this Scavenging Ooze able to block Gutter Bones? Because you can't block the Nightmare, you can't block the Freebooter, you can grow this Ooze up to a 7/7 this turn, and then a 9/9 next turn, which would be, 7 and 9, does come out to 16 damage. So, depending on how things come off the top of the library, I could see Andrew really putting themselves in a position to just steal the game.
But speaking of stealing the game, look at Rankle Master of Pranks.
Oh, that's reach!
that is nice.
Very
Ueda will accept the compliment.
The players.
And that's going to do it. Not this turn immediately. Andrew can gain a little bit of life as a cushion.
But even then, Rankle still is just going to trade this Gutter Bones for the Scavenging Ooze.
Right, Andrew has to use his mana to gain life. Rankle's going to eat that, and we'll happily throw away maybe just the Kai'Sa Freebooter too. Either way, we now have some lethal threats available. Get to buy back the Gullet Bones, and Andrew knows there's no card he can draw that would get him back in that situation.
And what a fast couple of games. And I just want to emphasize how much that Hunted Nightmare actually ended up doing in the games where Ueda felt like that they could check a copy of Embercleave. Game 1, we saw them have to be a little bit more conservative with that hold back. You don't want to randomly just